schedule. Okay. Now we're good to go. So thank you again for being here and for bearing with me. We're going to talk about the Q4 Media Barometer today. And to start off, we're going to get into the quarter over quarter and year over year changes, the best days for PR pitching, the PR pitching cycle timeline, and the specialized pitching highlights, and then wrap up with the Q&A. So just to start with some brief introductions, I'm Sam, I'm the head of content at Propel, and we have Eitan Goldstein joining us, the communications manager here. He uses Propel every day to garner earned media for our company, and he previously worked for GKPR, one of the premier PR tech firms in Israel. So when he presented companies from seed stage to Fortune 100 companies, he was the senior editor at Wine News and the English language edition of Israel's largest newspaper. Thank you for joining us today, Eitan.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's fun to get in front of the camera this time.
Absolutely. And a little background about Propel before we get going for anyone who's not familiar. We are an earned media platform revolutionizing the PR world. Propel is the first PR tool built by PR people for PR people. Our CEO, Zach Cutler, founded Propel in 2019 after running his own agency for about 9 years. So Zach was always on the lookout for better PR tools and technology to manage all of his agency's campaigns, journalist relationships, team productivity, and business outcomes. And there was no CRM for PR on the market, so he ended up selling his agency and starting Propel. Now we're on a mission to democratize and make PR technology accessible to the masses. We support leading brands and agencies like Real Chemistry, Microsoft, NPR, and more with our platform. So we're excited. Recently, we launched a mass follow-up feature, and we have lots more to come, so stay tuned. Getting into the good stuff and what you all came for, we're going to get into the quarter over quarter and year over year shifts in journalist engagement that we started to see in our reports. So here you can take a look at what we found for the open and response rate updates. We saw there was a slight increase in the open rate, actually, moving from about 38% closer to 40%. Kind of a small change, but interesting. Eitan, what do you think of this? And do you think this is an optimistic sign for opening pitches?
You know, I think overall, what it points to is changing journalist strategy or PR strategies. Something that we've been noticing at Propel, and if anyone's been following the news just about the media industry in general, newsrooms are getting cut just left and right. Just I think 3 weeks ago, BBC let go 400 reporters. You have Gannett, which has let go almost an equal amount, if not more, and Gannett, by the way, is the largest owner of newspapers in the United States. Axios and Cox, they merged and they started cutting their newsroom. BuzzFeed has been cutting its investigations room. So you're seeing less journalists, but the same amount, if not more, news coming. So what I think that we're seeing here with the numbers, with this slight uptick, is that despite all these cuts, it's a tiny uptick, it's 0.1%, but it's still the first time since we started doing the barometer that we see any numbers going up in terms of journalist response rates. And I personally think, just after seeing the data that we've been able to aggregate, that it's coming because journalists are changing their strategies to something that works a lot better. I think we're starting to see pitches that are shorter and more succinct, less pitches that are essentially just walls of text are being sent. And I think, and we're seeing that subject lines are also shorter subject lines are being sent. And I think that's getting journalists' attention. And I think that's the reason that response rates are going up. Something to keep in mind, however, is that when we talk about journalist response rates, we're not only talking about, yes, I want to interview the CEO. that would be awesome. And that's obviously what we're all hoping for. But a response rate includes a no thanks. And when I was a senior editor, I can tell you that I almost never responded. So just because I had so many pitches coming in, and there was so much news happening, especially in Israel, that I just didn't really have time to respond. So the fact that there's any sort of response at all, be it a no thanks, be it a yes, let's get that interview set up, I think is a good sign of the strategies shifting. And I think that's overall just a good trend, that the more that strategies shift, I think that that number will go up incrementally. I don't know if we'll see the 3.5% response rates we were seeing in 2021. But I do believe that with changing strategies, that response rate percentage will continue to go up.
I could see where you're coming from with that, especially from your background on the other side of things, as an editor and as a journalist. So there's no better insight to get than that. So thank you for your feedback there. We'll take a closer look at these response rates that you're talking about and what we saw exactly shift. You can see here what Eitan's referring to about these 2020 rates and moving on to this year. It's concerning to say the least, but it is optimistic that we're seeing this slight increase in the second graph below. So like Eitan mentioned, hopefully we see that continue to climb, and with these different findings about which pitches are working the best and which ones are outperforming others and get the better rates, we can actually start to shift that with these tweaks. So Eitan, what do you think from a journalistic standpoint about these numbers? Like, how does this reflect your personal experience?
Right. So, I mean, again, with shrinking newsrooms, there are less people to pitch. So there are less people to open. So everyone that we are pitching, we're all pitching, let's say, like, if we're all in tech, we're all pitching the same reporters, and that number of reporters is getting smaller. So we're actually all competing against each other to try to get, our stories to be seen. From the editor side or even the journalist side, we got to, as PR people, we need to understand what they're going through, or what they're looking at. First of all, you have the senior editors, such as me. You have editors in chief that are telling the journalists, hey, take this story, take that story. On top of that, there are wire services. It's either PR Newswire, if you're, for instance, in tech or business. You could have Reuters, AFP, AP, etc. And that's just a constant stream of information and stories that can be put up. And then there's us as the PR pros that are sending to these editors, senior editors, and journalists. So we have to understand that that's kind of our competition. Now, when I was, senior editor, what I remember happening is, let's say I'm working on a story or something like that, and I'm getting 20, 30 pitches an hour, basically. We would get over 100 a day. Every single one of us would get over 100 pitches a day. That's a ton. There's no way we're going to see all of them. So there would be times, just to let everyone know why isn't this person responding to my amazing pitch? Well, if I'm working on something and I'm getting, every 2 minutes I'm getting an email, I'm going to turn off my email browser to focus in on what I'm doing. Now, let's say, like I said, I'm not working on something, or it's something that isn't super involved and complicated, and I have my email browser open. And I've exhausted what I found on the news wires. I'm going to go over to the pitches. So not all journalists did this. This is just my experience, by the way, but I think it gives kind of like a insight as to how, journalists work. So what I did first, I didn't click on every one of them. Some journalists do, and they are saints. I didn't. I just looked, and I looked for the most engaging subject line that told me what I needed to know immediately, as quickly as possible. And then I clicked on that. I clicked on that email. Now, before I even started reading, if I just was presented with a wall of text, I just immediately deleted. I was like, I don't have time for this. No, click delete. Now, we've noticed that people are the number of pitches that are 500 words and more are going down. I think that number needs to go even farther down, because keep in mind, 500 words is a single Word document single spaced. Like that's a ton of text. That's a novel. And no journalist is going to be reading a novel. We want to know, the journalist wants to know, and especially, as me as a senior editor who is sending, stories and pitches to journalists to cover, or I would cover it myself. I want to know exactly what is important, why should I, and what's going on in the story, what's the news, and then most importantly, and this is something that I think sometimes as PR people we forget about because we want to show off the company we represent or show off our own organization if we're in-house, is why should I as the journalist care? What is my purpose? Like, why should I care about your story? Like, cool, you rose money. Okay, like, why should I care? What does the technology do? What is this company going to do? How is this going to shape the industry? That's what the journalist cares about, and that's what I was looking for as well. So I think that's something that we have to, as PR people, to always keep in mind. The journalist is writing for an audience. Why would the journalist write about us? Why would the journalist write about this company? So continuing on with that, I just wanted to. There are several different types of pitches, as we all know. You have thought leadership, you have byline article, you have funding announcements, what have you. Something that I always found really nice, because there's different types of pitches. If this is a thought leadership pitch and it's a wall of text, delete. But if it is a byline article, what I like to see, and what we've noticed at Propel, and what I've noticed just throughout my career in PR, is if I write a small little, blurb about 150 words, maximum 250, if I really can't get it down, about the article, and then put the entire article plus some images, that usually got me more results, or gets me more results as a PR person. And from the journalist side, I'm like, oh, my work is already done for me. Copy, paste, put it up. So that's a little bit of, we'll get more into the different aspects of different types of pitching later. But, that was a little bit of what I saw and how I operated when I was a senior editor, and, what I've seen work for me as a PR person today.
That's really interesting. And like you're saying, that was a good follow-up, was just, is there ever a reason to include that block of text? And so maybe if it's in the form of a byline, but I think there's usually not a great reason to just throw in several paragraphs, upwards of 8 sentences long, like in grade school or before. No journalist wants to go through that. And I think what we see a lot of times as well, and we've had a lot of chats with current journalists at different outlets like CBS and USA Today, they just notice that PR people will throw in everything that might apply. So that's where mass pitching just comes in, and they see right through it. So we hear that they're getting these 1,000+ word emails sometimes, and they just know from the second they see it, okay, this went to 50 or 200 contacts. So why should I give it the time of day?
Yeah. And even beyond that, something to that, I think some tips that we can share to just get pitches to be shorter and how to make them a little bit more engaging and easy to digest for the journalists. Because remember, I didn't even read these blocks of text. I just absolutely immediately deleted them. When I saw something where the physical email itself, before I even started reading the words, when I saw that the email was short, that the paragraphs looked very digestible, that's when I started reading. Just how the pitch itself looks will help determine whether or not a journalist will read it. Because again, a journalist is getting over 100 emails a day. Make yours easy for the journalist to read. And that was something that we really appreciated over at Ynet as well. And to make it shorter, it's really not rocket science. First of all, you can just use conjunctions, because remember, like, I'm looking at what does the email look like before I start reading. Okay, like, it's short, great. You could use conjunctions instead of that is that's, instead of will not, won't, just easy things like that. In addition, just get to the point. You don't need fluff. You don't need a ton of background, as Sam was saying. We could just give us what is going on, but give enough information that the journalist has their interest piqued. You don't need to give everything. The journalist's entire job is to ask questions. A journalist's job is to understand something in depth. When you pique a journalist's interest and they start asking questions, that's where you know that you're on the right track. I mean, so let that happen. And eventually, if the journalist's like, hey, I would cover this, but, here's some questions before I do, I would like to know X, Y, and Z. Okay, give it to them. Email number 2, give them the answers and say, and by the way, if you'd like to know more about this here, like, I could put you in touch with the CEO, or I could put you in touch with this, that, or the other person as a source. And it's kind of like fishing. You're kind of just like reeling them in real slowly, and you don't want to break that line. So that was what we found works. I mean, that's how we found some of our better stories as a senior editor, and that's what we found works for Propel as well too. Just pique the interest and then get them to ask the questions.
That's great insight. Thank you so much. This connects pretty nicely with our next topic, which I really always love looking at, which is the best day for pitching. And this is something we see updates in PR outlets all the time claiming, like, okay, it's Wednesday, okay, it's Tuesday. And it's a really great question when it comes down to it, because you have to wonder, is it about the day or is it all about the pitch? And what is the combination maybe going on there, and how can you make the work week work for you? So we'll look at a few of these numbers and a few highlights just right off the bat. We see 2 big spikes in pitches going out on Tuesday and Thursday in the blue there. And then we also see a big jump in responses on Wednesday. And then our top open days in the dark orange, we see Tuesday and Thursday as well. So thinking about what Eitan's been saying, there's a lot to unpack here, because to one point, your pitch just needs to be high quality. You could send it on Monday or you could send it on Thursday. And if it's a good pitch, it's going to do better than others. But also, we actually see a lot of very organic trends throughout the week with pitch activity. Eitan, if you want to comment on that a little bit about just what could be going on here.
Yeah, sure. So, I think I think that we need, first and foremost, journalists are people too. You're especially if you're not general assignment news, where you're not working 24/7 and there are actual weekends, and not just like random days scattered throughout because by law you need to take a break. So you're if you're in the English speaking Western world, more likely than not, your weekday is going to be Monday to Friday, your work week. In Israel, it's Sunday to Thursday, by the way. So that adds a whole different perspective to the numbers we're seeing. But when you're working Monday through Friday, I think that we should just look at, why are there less responses on a Monday and a Friday? Well, what about the way that you work? Monday, you're coming off of a weekend, right? It doesn't matter if you're in PR, finance, law, doesn't matter. You're coming off the weekend. You're either finishing things up from the week before, or you're planning for the week ahead. And you're still kind of in that mode of relaxation. You're coming off of 2 days of hopefully relaxing time with your friends or family, and hopefully not working over the weekend. So, I mean, that's why, Mondays aren't typically the best, because everyone is just starting to ramp up. If you look at Tuesday, there have been multiple studies done that say that Tuesday is the most productive workday across all sectors, across the Western world, where the work week is Monday through Friday. There used to actually be, I remember my grandpa telling me that you always wanted to buy a car that was on the production line on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, because you knew that was when the people were going to be most productive. And that they would be like most on their game when they're building the car. Well, it's the same thing for a lot of different industries, including PR and journalism. Tuesday, you still have the energy from the weekend, a little bit of it left. You're really, focused in on what you're doing, and you're a lot more productive in general. That trend typically continues around Wednesday, and then Thursday, is more or less the same. So I think that's why, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are really the biggest days for pitching and responses because, just as human beings who are coming back to the work week, that's when we're the most productive. Um, what I'd like to look at also is Friday. Friday is really interesting because, Friday typically we're thought of, okay, like let's finish up the stuff from the week. We're almost done. Let's get to the weekend. And, people don't really think of pitching on a Friday, but as you can see from this graph, the highest number of responses is actually on Friday. But if you're also still looking at this graph, sorry, the responses are in I think that's yellow. I'm horrible with colors. Sorry, guys. Yeah, that yellow brown. And then blue, that light cyan blue, is pitches. And you can see that pitches just dramatically drop off on Friday. What it looks like is happening is, there's so fewer pitches going out on Friday that a journalist is going to respond because they're not being inundated with a flood of emails. They're not getting hundreds and hundreds or 100 pitches on Friday. They might be getting 50. So it's a lot more likely that someone is going to be responding to you, be it a yes or a no, because they're not being overwhelmed with emails. And so I think that's why we're really, seeing that trend as well over there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we've seen it in past reports for those of you who have been following the barometer quarter over quarter and year over year. We often do see that Friday has the highest response rate relative to the volume going out. So, what do we make of that? An initial reaction could be that is not realistic. Announcements that are time
Yeah.
sensitive, we can't be waiting till Friday or any specific day besides launch date or when the embargo needs to go out. But that kind of leaves room for an interesting strategy in itself. Eitan had mentioned that this might be a great time to pitch those more evergreen stories or more thought leadership pieces. Do you want to get more into that and how some people and for some pitches you might be able to work with these advantages like a Friday pitch?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're between announcements, why not? It's something that, the journalist can think over. They have the whole weekend to think about it. And it's something that, you're not really stressed about getting out too. You're more likely to get the response. It's if you're pitching something that you're looking more, just as Sam said, for thought leadership. You're looking to get in somewhere to portray your organization. So, it's I think it's a good way to get a journalist's attention and get them thinking over the weekend, like, oh, you know what, this could be a cool story. Oh, you know what, this would be a good person. Give them something to chew on over the weekend, and then when they come back on Monday, like hopefully, there hasn't been some crazy event in the world that in the news cycle that'll completely derail them. But it's already in their inbox. They've read it already. Hopefully they've responded. And they're kind of chewing it over. That way, when you send your follow-up on Monday, maybe it's already been on their mind and they might be more likely to cover that.
Right. And that's such a constant challenge as well that you mentioned about just breaking news completely taking over. You had shared with me an experience of a colleague that had this amazing story at your past outlet and just squashed. Sometimes those situations you can't even work around. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, sure. So I had to not give too much away, I had a journalist go out into the field to do a story, really interesting story, which sadly didn't get the light of day because Israeli President Shimon Peres happened to die about 3 hours before the story was set to go out. Now, Shimon Peres was a Nobel laureate, a Peace Prize winner. And for his funeral, about 50 heads of state, if I'm not mistaken, came to Israel. So for the entire week, all we were talking about was this funeral, the preparations. It was the Israeli version of the Queen passing away. So when, unfortunately, despite this journalist spending hours collecting interviews, potentially putting himself in danger to get some of these interviews, despite the story being really timely for that time, the this other breaking news event took precedence for over 2 weeks, for over a week. And by the time that the breaking news event, i.e., the funeral of the former president of Israel and prime minister of Israel for a time, by the time that was over, the story was kind of cold. It wasn't newsworthy anymore. And that's something that might happen to any of us. It could, there might be a great story. You might get an interview happened with a journalist, and then a piece of breaking news happens. And then by the time that news cycle is over, the story that you did is irrelevant. It's an unfortunate fact, and but it's something that happens. And unfortunately, we have to deal with that. There's not much you can really do about that. I mean, you can try to push a little bit, but if the moment's passed, the moment's passed. And it could be that the editor just kills the story because what was said 2 weeks ago is no longer relevant. The world's moved on, and we have to move on as well. So
Right.
it's sad, and it's a lot, and you might feel like it's a lot of work wasted. We're all trying to hit our OKRs. We're all trying to hit, like that number that we promised the client of pieces published on them. But sometimes, the world just decides to go a little haywire. Journalists have different priorities. And at the end of the day, the journalist doesn't owe us anything. The journalist needs to write the stories that they're told to by their editors. The editors need to write the stories and put the stories up that are most likely to get clicks, that are most likely to be read by their audience, and that's their foremost goal. So sadly, this is something that happens, and we should all keep that in mind.
Yep, I think that's a good reminder to have more sympathy to their side of things, because a lot of times it's not even in their hands, and maybe you get ghosted, if you will, and the journalist had nothing to do with it. So
Yeah.
that's a good reminder too, and definitely something I think we can
Yeah,
all
and
relate
and I
to.
think I think it's also, like, not we maybe not even sympathy is the right word, but I think just, you could understand something and not agree with it. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but you know what, like, having a little bit of understanding is like adding a tiny little bit of sugar to that bitter pill. At least it's beyond everybody's control. Let's keep moving forward, let's keep pushing, and let's keep getting results, and that should be all of our mindsets.
Absolutely. That's a good conclusion to this discussion, I would say. And at least you can see these ebbs and flows now and what's
Yeah.
been going on for the past quarter, and make it a lot easier to decide last minute, like, okay, this didn't go quite as planned. We'll probably have a good shot at getting a response on this day, or there's no way we're getting through with this story amongst all the rest. So, very, very insightful. And similar to that, we get into the pitching cycle, which has a lot to do with follow ups and how long you should wait, when you should be more adamant, and all of the rest coming off of the last discussion. So let's take a look at what we found here. So we looked at the pitching cycle, and for the sake of this discussion, we took a look at when the most pitches had conversions. So for opens, responses, and all of the rest. Um, and instead of doing the average, you might be wondering, why didn't we do that? Um, we have to be considering that some stories take months to convert. You could hear back from a journalist a year later. There's some big outliers when it comes to this. So we're looking at majority. If you want to look at the breakdown, we have the majority of opens happening in 1 hour, responses in 4, and stories becoming published in 3 days' time. And that makes me wonder personally about follow-ups. So, Eitan, how do you navigate that with pitching? And does it vary dramatically from one story to the next? I imagine it depends.
So I'm gonna answer this kind of I'm gonna answer this, and then I want to like talk a little bit about the data as well. Sorry for kind of going off the rails here. But yeah, this the way that I like to do follow-ups is I typically wait 24 hours. You know, I when I was working as a senior editor, like sometimes I'd be working on something and then, I'm sure we all have those little notifications, especially if you're using Outlook, that you get on the bottom right-hand corner. You have the email that pops up. And what do you see when you see that little that little thing popping up in the bottom right-hand corner? Well, you see the subject line. So, there would be times where I'm working on a story and all of a sudden I see a subject line pop up that I'm really interested in. Has nothing to do with the story, but I'm thinking, oh, that is awesome. I totally want to get to that story. And then one of two things will happen. Either I'll immediately click on it, or I'll just like remember that it's there, finish up what I'm doing, and then go back and click on it, which again, like the majority of pitches happening within 1 hour, accurate. Or sorry, a pitch opens happening within 1 hour, accurate. If I like something, if I see something pop up in that little window, and I think that subject line is really good, I'm going to click on it. I'm going to open it to keep that fresh in mind. And I'm going to keep that a little bit in the back of my mind as I'm doing the other thing. There are other times, however, where I would have been, writing something. I see the thing pop up, and maybe I saw it, maybe I didn't. But in any case, like I continue writing, finish it up, and then go home. So then the next day, 24 hours later, maybe I saw that subject line and I totally forgot about it, or maybe I saw it and I wanted it and I totally forgot about it. And I just didn't have time to open it. When that 24 hours hit, and I got that follow-up email, pushing that back up to the top of my inbox and getting that little notification, it reminded me, oh, awesome. Yeah, I totally forgot about this story. And I'm going to open it up and I'm going to respond, or I'm going to look at it and see if there's something there. So that's why I like, the 24 hours, because it's still fresh enough in the journalist's mind to, like it might be just hidden away back there, like, but the cobwebs haven't really started forming in relation to that particular pitch. So I really think that 24 hours is just a great amount of time to wait before you're going to be sending that follow-up pitch. But that's, for thought leadership, and even for announcements. For an announcement, by the way, what I like to do is once the embargo lifts, if you're pitching under embargo, I like to send the entire press release, and this is really big, images. Your press kit, really will determine in a lot of cases whether or not someone puts up your story or not. I remember, I would have journalists or even myself getting like announcements of whatever. Could be a funding announcement. I liked whatever, it doesn't matter. And if there weren't images, I'm not gonna put it up. Why? Because to find an image might take me 10, 15 minutes. And then I might get an email from the PR person, hey, can you use this image instead? Like, no, why didn't you just send it to me before? Make my life easy. Because what they're basically doing is they're copy, paste, editing, moving things around, submit, and it's going on the site. So if you're able to give that in that press kit, images, if you're going to an online publication or an imprint publication, just have it all there for the journalists to have, make their lives as easy as possible. That will help a lot. In addition to, making the press release sound interesting, making it, clear why this is important, things like that. But having images would be important. And that, anyway, so sorry, I digress. But that's, following up with an announcement. When I'm following up, however, with a Byline article, what I like to do is, I do read the submission guidelines. They're there for a reason. And, the more pushy you are, the more you're going to annoy the journalist, less likely they are to put up your story. For Byline articles, it'll say, as I'm sure we all know, like, we'll get back to you if we like it. Like within a week. And if not, then nothing's going to happen. Well, okay, they say nothing's going to happen. What's the worst thing that happens if I try to follow up with that? It's already like not percent chance. I might as well blow on, as we say in Hebrew, translated into English, I'm going to blow on the coal to see if a fire starts. I'm going to try just push a little bit harder to see if that'll move the needle a little bit in terms of like getting that Byline article published. Because maximum, I get the same result as I already got, which is nothing. at the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, that someone sees it and says, "Oh wow, I'm going to put this up." It's rare for that to happen, but in my time as in on the PR side of things, in my PR world life, I have seen that actually work a few times. Not often, but it has worked. So that's kind of like with follow-ups what I'm about.
And that's a good reminder to one, have your own rule of thumb and that 24-hour window that you have in mind from just being on in their shoes, but also being mindful of what they tell you. Like oftentimes, like you're saying with thought leadership, they're very clear and organized about when you'll hear back from them, even if it's a no. Like, we will get back to you by 1 month about yes or no. Like some
Yeah,
outlets will do that, and that can save you all of this hassle and stop you from annoying them any further. So
yeah.
that's always beneficial.
That.
Um,
Oh, sorry. What were you saying, Sam?
I was just curious, what's some of the longer timelines that you've seen? Like some stories I've heard just from speaking with other people in the industry take upwards of 6 months to ever convert or longer. And it can take quite a bit of relationship building and persistence. And I think the art of doing that without being a nuisance is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, well, so let's go back to Byline articles. There are some outlets that will say, if we accept you, we'll put it up within 4 months. And you're like, 4 months? I promised my client, 20 publications per quarter, 15 a quarter. Like, this is ridiculous. But you know what? Sometimes it's just the way it is. And, there's not really too much that you can do if they, like, from the get-go, tell you that it's going to take 4 or 5 months. There's not much you can do. And something, but let's get into like interviews, thought leadership, or like getting interviewed for. Well, let's start with thought leadership. We've all been in this position where the journalist interviews you, or your client, or your organization, and a day goes by, nothing. 2 days go by, nothing. 3 days go by, nothing, and it is frustrating. So like, how do you do, when would you, like, when should you follow up with them? And what I personally do, and this is something I found to be not super annoying from the journalist side, like when I was a journalist, and something that I found works for me from the PR side, is if after, if a journalist doesn't tell you when they're going to be publishing, after 3 days, I think it's fair to be like, hey, like, when do you think this will be published? If a journalist says, oh, it'll be published within the week, okay, 8 or 9 days later and it's not up, hey, like, do you have a timeline on when this is going to be published? And then let's say they don't respond within a day or two. So that's when I start waiting, 48 hours. Hey, is this going to be published? What's going on? What's the timeline looking on this? Just kindly following up with this, something like that. Not too pushy, but like, hey, like, we did do this thing together. Where is it? And then, like, usually I'll follow up a third time, but that'll be if it hasn't been put up within like a week after that second follow up, because usually if after a month and a half, it's not gonna happen. And now there are a lot of reasons why this could happen. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that you did anything wrong. I could tell you again, like, as a senior editor, just like with that story I previously told, sometimes things happen and the editor says, no, I told you initially you could do this story. We're low on resources. We aren't enough people, that we have these other things that we instead need to do that, management or the owners want us to do, or there are these other stories that have come that are more interesting and that we want to cover than this one that you had previously. So sorry, you're getting the X. And I could tell you that even here at Propel, we were working, we had a article that was sent, and we had like an email interview with the CEO. And we were working with this publication, a great publication, by the way, and the people we were working with were fantastic. And then at the end of the day, the editor-in-chief said, listen, like, unfortunately, like, some other newsworthy events happened. We're not going to be able to publish this. And, that went through a month of work of back and forth and things like that. And that's just something that happens. And unfortunately, you just have to roll with the punches and keep moving forward. So that's kind of what we were seeing with this. And then with let's talk about announcements. Announcements are more time sensitive. Um, so what I usually do, let's say someone I'm pitching under embargo and someone asks for the release. What if they don't publish the release on the release date, I usually wait a day or two, maybe 48 hours, 72, and then I start being like, hey, like, are you thinking about publishing this? I could tell you from both the editorial side, the journal and the journalist side from my time there, and as well as that's a great way to do it. You've given us the time to put it up. You've given us like a window of opportunity, and we were the ones that asked for it. We do have some responsibility here. So it does make sense that after a few days that it's not being put up and that you're not seeing anything coming from us. So to send that follow-up after about 48 72 hours after an announcement goes out, I think that's very fair. That's how we felt in the like when we as journalists, and that's how I personally feel. And now as PR, I don't feel like I'm like sitting on top of somebody's head, being like, hey, where is this? Like, give it to me now. And I don't feel like I'm really annoying them too much. Now, unfortunately, because journalists are humans and all humans are different, sometimes you might get someone who's going to respond really negatively, and like it just happens. What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing about that. I think anytime we are able to speak with someone that has been on both sides, it is so insightful as to how each person navigates the situation that way. Getting into a little bit about what you were mentioning with these specialized pitching stats, we did a few specialized studies just to look into exactly what's going on with some of these different types of pitches, because of course there's quite the variety, and that's what we ended up seeing in the numbers, whether it be a byline article pitch or a very timely news announcement. We do see the numbers shift dramatically, and it's really interesting from a pitching standpoint. So these are just a few highlights that go over just the range of responses you could see and could shed light on some of what you're experiencing on your end. So one, kind of disheartening, the broadcast media pitch average is 1.47% for the study we did. And just so you know, for each study, we had a sample size of over 1,000 pitches for each, some with 15,000 and a few with 3,000, just so you know the sample size. But again, we just saw a record low response rate there. And speaking with a broadcast reporter from CBS, she actually let us know why that very realistically is happening, at least at her outlet. And for them, they get a lot of pitches without the right visual elements. And Eitan, do you want to shed some light on the sort of visuals that they're looking for and what they really need to proceed with a story?
Yeah, sure. Like TV is 100% visual. Let's be real. I mean, if a news piece is being done well, you could hypothetically watch the channel with the sound off. I actually had the privilege of meeting the head of Al Jazeera Arabic for the Americas, and we were talking about this, and he said that one of the reasons that Al Jazeera is one of the most watched, channels worldwide, despite people not speaking Arabic, is because how much emphasis they place on the visuals. You don't need any sound. You don't need to understand the language. Just by watching the visuals that they have, you can get about 60 to 70% of what's going on in the news story. And that's something that I think, that's taken away to one extreme, right? But I think that, just by understanding that, hey, if I want my organization or someone that I represent to be on broadcast, they need to have something that can be filmed. For tech companies dealing with, I don't know, Kubernetes, that's going to be really difficult. If you're representing like car companies, oh my gosh, it's so easy. You could say, oh, like, here's the crash test. Here's B-roll footage of the crash test. Come to the factory. If you're, it's things like that. So So if it's filmable and you're able to provide some sort of B-roll footage, that's typically what I saw getting put on the air. While I was primarily doing more print journalism, Ynet has a really big studio, like film studio. I obviously became close with the producers, and we would get pitches that people wanted to be, in on the more video side of Ynet News. And so when that happened, we would get these big B-rolls. We would send out a reporter if we liked it to go out and actually film. And I think those are great ways to, really get into broadcast.
Absolutely. And Lisa Rosner, she was the reporter we were speaking with last about this. She basically explained they can't possibly physically cover your story no matter if it's the biggest thing out there. Like, they can't do it even if they want to. So that's really important to keep in mind. And we released a guide specific to each of these findings if you want to check it out in greater detail. Looking at what we've been talking about as well with Byline pitches, there was an amazing response rate to that. We got an average of 26.5%. And we also saw, really interestingly, the better pitches were the longest. So ranging 500 to upwards of 900 words, which interestingly tells us that journalists want to see the byline right away, because there's really no other realistic explanation for that. And Eitan, I believe you experienced this recently with some of your bylines and
Yeah.
as an editor.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, first of all, from the journalist side, you get a byline article. It's your work's done for you. All you need to do is just like fact check. You're going to be clicking on the links that people are using. You're going to be checking like numbers, things like that. But compared to actually going out and writing the piece, like, it's gold. It's my work's done for me. So that's one thing. But when you are pitching them, what we like to see as journalists, and what I do currently as PR, is put everything in the body of the email. The journalists don't really want to be like clicking through links. You don't know what their link clicking policy is, and that is a thing. If there's an attachment policy, the journalists do have those, because as I'm sure we know, with unfortunately, for instance, with Jamal Khashoggi from Washington Post, if you click on a link, all of a sudden you could activate some spyware or something like that. So just, there are limitations on what you could send as an attachment. And also it just like adds a whole nother layer of just complexity when a journalist wants to see something just quickly, really fast. So just, write a little blurb at the top for the pitch for your byline article, and then put the actual article itself in the body of the email, so that the journalists can just immediately see it, scan it, look at it, read it, and say, okay, yeah, this would be something interesting. And then they'll themselves will go in and usually edit it a little bit, and then they'll start a really cool back and forth with the journalists. And also, by the way, when that happens, it's a great way to build a journalist relationship, because you're already going back and forth with them over edits anyway. Why not add in a PS like, I saw you're in Hawaii, right? That I enjoyed those personally. So not everyone might, but I do.
Absolutely. And again, it's a really interesting exception that we see that, because no other pitch that we've studied gets this engagement from those really lengthy versions. They still otherwise do prefer those pitches that stay around 150 words. So really good to know the next time you're pitching thought leadership or a byline that you could have an exception there, and it could actually make their life easier. And then last but not least, we have a response rate to funding announcements that was almost double the average from the same time period. So we see a little over 6% versus 3.33%, which 6% still isn't great. I know we're not all excited about these numbers necessarily, but that's encouraging that we're seeing this increase specifically for funding news. Eitan, what would you say about that, and why journalists are much more interested in a funding announcement than just your average pitch?
Right. So, I mean, first of all, for a funding announcement, just from the PR side, I mean, they're so easy to make. of course, you have to talk about like the who, what, where, how, and why. Why is this important for the company? Why is this important for the industry? What type of, what does this mean for the industry, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, it's an already made article. It's an already made story for the journalist. Put in those images, just because the journalist is essentially going to copy paste, shift things around, edit, do some minor edits. Within 20 minutes they have themselves one of their stories that they need to have for the week. So like just in terms of just ease of story, it's a for the journalist side, and for us as well, it's something that's relatively easy to make, as long as it's, it has to be made well, of course, has to be made interesting. But it's really something like relatively simple that, we as PR people can do, and it's really easy to do it well. From the journalist perspective, and just from the journalist perspective, as I said, it's really easy to put it up, throw it on there. But from an media industry and just in perspective, and even from an economic perspective as well, these are important stories. The more funding stories there are, you're seeing, okay, well, where's investment going? What types of investment are going to what types of industries? In these types of stories play into an overarching story of what is the economy looking like. If you're seeing like funding stories like we were seeing at the end of 2020, sorry, at the end of 2021, really, where you're just having these like massive funding stories, these massive rounds of funding. Like, well, why is that happening? What does this mean for the economy at large? What does this mean for whatever industry it is? If this is a technology that's dealing with education, a technology dealing with medicine, if this is a merger and acquisition between two major banks, if this is a merger and acquisition between two major telecoms companies, what does this mean for the overarching industry? And these stories really do fit in to an overarching picture of just different industries in general. And from a financial perspective, that's extremely important, because it gives investors, it doesn't matter if it's a VC, it doesn't matter what they're investing, but they get it helps paint the overarching picture of, where should they put their money. And that's why these people are going to read these, tech publications, or one of the reasons people read tech publications and financial publications. Where's the next place I want to put my money? How am I going to 10x my investment? What's going to be healthy in the next 6 months to 5 years, depending on what my investment strategy is. In addition to that, the journalists themselves and the publications, they want to be first. If you're not, as Ricky Bobby in Talladega Nights said, if you're not first, you're last. So, you as a financial publication, you want to be able to break funding news first, because exactly what I said, it's going to be promoting the overarching health of whatever industry you're talking about, or you're going to be talking about, what industries are getting more investment, what are getting less investment. And, when it comes to investing, just milliseconds can be the difference between millions of dollars and nothing. I mean, just as an aside, a fiber optic cable that shaved off a quarter of a millisecond between London and New York is estimated to have driven revenues by tens of millions of dollars for stock traders. So when they're able to get that piece of news, when journalists are able to get that piece of news and push it out first, that means that their credibility is higher. They're going to get more readership. Wall Street Journal, as we know, paywalled. Bloomberg, same thing. So these are, TechCrunch, there is a bit of a paywall, but you're like anything given out push notifications or something like that. They want to be at the very cutting edge. They want to be first, because that's how they're going to keep their keep their subscribers. So it's important for them. And so I think that's also why, funding is not only quick to go up, but it's also with the rate also is nearly double.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Very insightful. I appreciate all the detail. Thank you, everyone.
Hopefully it wasn't too much.
No, I think anything from a journalistic standpoint is very helpful for the PR world. Thank you, everyone, again for being here. That wraps up our discussion for today. I added in a QR code and the link to the barometer report if you haven't gotten your copy yet. There's a lot more good stuff in there, lots more highlights that we did not have time to cover. but definitely interesting to check out. You could scan the code with your phone here if you want to just go ahead and grab it that way, or you could add this link to your browser and just do it that way as well. It's in our resource tab on the website if you prefer that. So again, thank you so much. We had a few questions come in, so I'll go ahead and just stop the share and check those out. We had one on, oh, actually for Eitan, since you shifted from the journalist world to PR, what sparked that, and do you like one better than the other?
So, you know, the biggest reason that I shift, and this is the biggest reason that I see a lot of my friends that were journalists that also go into PR, is unfortunately money. I'm able to support myself a lot better and have a much higher quality of life in PR than I am in journalism. In the United States, the journalist's average salary is about $40,000 a year before tax. Journalism is fantastic. It's fun. You get interesting access to interesting people. And depending on what you're covering, it could be pretty exciting. It could be very exciting, sometimes a little too exciting. But at the end of the day, it was I wanted to stay more or less in the journalism world. I still like when you're working for an agency, or even now, I'm still talking to really interesting people. I still am having a great time. I love writing stories, writing pitches. I actually enjoy, because it's nice to get to think like a journalist as well. But I'm able to have a much higher quality of life, unfortunately, in PR, or not unfortunately, but in PR as opposed to journalism. And something that I think that should be noted is, publications really can't pay their journalists a lot of money. That's why we're seeing a lot of these cuts. Something at Propel that we believe is going to start happening is there's going to be more emphasis on influencers, and more emphasis on pitching to bloggers and people that are freelancers, because these publications simply can't afford to keep their journalists. So that was the main reason why. And I'm really happy I made the switch, because again, I'm doing what I love. I still get to do interviews. The interviews are a little bit different as opposed to interviewing people in government. I'm interviewing people in industry, or even talking to some of our clients. But I'm still able to, have the same overarching and same field of expertise. And I'm very happy with the switch.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I want to respect everyone's Friday time. I know we're all eager to get into the weekend, but thank you again for being here. We will try to answer the rest of the questions on follow-up posts and blogs, so keep an eye out for that. And in case anyone logged off early, the recording will be available. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, Samantha@propelmypr.com. And I'm happy to answer anything you might have afterwards. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye.